Hello, I'm Ian Danskin, and this is a thing, a podcast. An excuse to talk to people I find interesting about subjects we both find interesting. This is me using the podcast format to have conversations that probably wouldn't come about organically. Like, I can say to a lot of people, I would love to pick your brain about science fiction novels, but sometimes I want to say, because I know you're a fan and I've been halfway through it for 2 years, I would like to talk to you, in specific, about Ada Palmer's Terra Ignota series, and nothing else, for 75 minutes with pre-prepared questions. And I am in the weird and fortunate position where I can make that happen. For people concerned about such things, episodes of this podcast will be simultaneously released here on Innuendo Studios and on my secondary channel, Innuendo Twodios, Twodios. After a week or so, they will be unlisted from the main channel, but stay on the secondary. I've never liked it when video essayists start putting non-essays like podcasts or live streams on their main channel. This is a me problem, but it's just not tidy. But they will only be unlisted on the main, not deleted. There won't be dead links or anything. And I'm early in the process of getting it hosted on actual podcast services, but I'm not at this point making any statements as to when that will happen or how often episodes will come out or what the sound quality will be. Stuff will happen when and how it happens. This is me experimenting with not overthinking things or overpromising things. Also, I'm not actually planning an episode on Terra Ignota, but, the future is unwritten and full of possibilities. In this episode, I talked to friend and criminally underrated YouTuber Magdalen Rose about our shared condition. We both got diagnosed with ADHD in our 30s. Mags has just done something that is, to the restless brain housed inside my bone cage, unthinkable. She wrote a book? Like an asshole? Despite repeated attempts, fiction is something I haven't managed to pull off in a very long time, and I demanded she explain herself. I thought we were the same. What follows is a 3-part conversation broadly about the creative hustle for people whose brains often find doing the thing in front of them excruciating. At my suggestion, we timed our conversation such that my meds would be wearing off around the same time hers were kicking in, so you could maybe hear me get less focused over time while she got more focused. But in the end, I think we both got less focused. C'est la vie bohème. With that, let's get to point B. Part 1. Pre-diagnosis. So, okay. May I ask you a bunch of invasive questions about
Please
ADHD?
Do.
Okay,
Please
well,
do.
first of all, I was interested in talking to you because in the last year, as you know, I got diagnosed with ADHD, and
Yes.
you are one of my friends who has ADHD.
Correct.
And you just wrote a book with ADHD.
Yes.
So, for starters, can you tell me the pitch of your book?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I've come unprepared. Well, the pitch of my book is a murder mystery, sort of psychological thriller called Strays. And it is about a woman who is solving the mystery of a friend's death while being a mortician.
And you said it's part 1 of 2?
It is part 1 of 2. Yeah, that's the ADHD part of this is that I did have to cut it into 2 halves. Eventually, I just realized if I was going to wait until I finished it entirely, I was never going to get it done. So part 1 is sort of like me playing chicken with myself. It's like, who's going to flinch first, me or the fan base?
So is the mystery still unsolved at the end of book 1?
Oh, yes, very much so.
All right. So I haven't gotten to read it yet. I'm in the middle of like 5 books right now, but it's in. I have a tab open because I'm a patron, so I got the pre-release copy, and the tab is open, but I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet. So
you have the classic 400 tabs open at all times.
I have 1 tab, so
Wow.
I can funnel all my tabs closed into, but it basically like makes a big bookmark. But how many tabs are in my I don't even want to think about how many are in the 1 tab. This would crash the internet if I opened all of them.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Like, it would crash your internet.
Yeah. Most of my friends with ADHD they have like the forest of tabs.
Yeah. So, okay. I wanted to talk first about what our lives were like pre-diagnosis.
Sure.
So how long before you thought that maybe your brain worked differently from other people's?
I think it came to me pretty early, probably around high school, but my understanding was at that point was just that I was an artist. It's like, oh, well, artists are kooky, you know? And I think because of my personality, I had gotten a, reputation of being sort of bubbly and scatterbrained. And so like the terminology at the time was that I was an airhead, right? I was just an airhead.
I
And
think the
so,
PC term is manic pixie dream girl.
oh dear. Yeah. Well, I mean, that, but actually a human being, right? And yeah, so I was an airhead and that I was a scatterbrain, but it was the blanket explanation for my problem. And then as I got older, I really began to realize, like, wow, I'm having a lot of trouble, even when I'm actively trying to discard this sort of airhead persona, when I am actually, when things are at stake. And I think that was the big turning point for me was that, in high school, you forget about a test or, you skip school or do, whatever. You're just like, well, you're in high school. It's no big deal. But as things started to get more serious and the stakes got higher and the consequences got higher, I realized I was like, I'm not actually able to just stop doing this. And that's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I got away with a lot by just being kind of smart.
Right.
Like middle school through high school, it was like, oh, well, it doesn't matter that I don't ever remember to study for a test because provided I remember to do my homework, I'll get an A on my math test. And
Right.
then it was like sophomore year of high school, the math got hard enough that I couldn't do that. And then immediately I was like, who cares about math anyway?
That is exactly, yes, exactly my experience. I was, first of all, I wasn't a problem child because I have the inattentive type of ADHD. So,
Terminology. ADHD is diagnosed in two types, the inattentive type that Mags just described and hyperactive type. Think boys climbing up the walls. For the record, I am diagnosed with both, or combined type.
I was just polite. I wasn't interfering with class, even though I was zoned out and I was often sleeping. um, I was just not a problem. So, and I was getting really good grades in some of my classes if it was something I was interested in. So if it was history or English, obviously art, anything creative that I could have a discussion with someone about, I could fly through those classes. It was anything I actually needed to study for, like physical sciences, math. And that's where I was like, well, I guess I'm just an artsy person, and that's why I'm bad at math.
Your whole career planned out.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, you are still an artsy person now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people with ADHD are creative, and it sort of does drive a creative spirit, right? Just because of the way your brain works.
So when there was something you had to get yourself to accomplish that you couldn't necessarily count on, like, your brain's just going to latch onto it until it's done. Mm-hmm. How did you get yourself to do it?
Most of the time, I didn't.
Yeah.
It was really bad for many years throughout the entirety of my 20s. It was a problem of avoidance mostly. You find when you're the most productive is when you have this like flood of like dopamine and energy and you get so excited about it. And so I kept waiting for that to happen. Right. And so I thought, well, I don't feel that way today. So maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. And then as the deadlines would pass and things wouldn't get done, I would start to get very, very anxious, but I still couldn't do it, which caused a lot of problems. But a lot of the time later on, what I would find is that the easiest way to do it was if I just had someone with me.
The body doubling?
Yeah, the body doubling was really helpful. And then once I started learning more about ADHD and also that the way I was actually extremely indicative of ADHD, that I started learning all the coping mechanisms, and then things got a lot easier.
After school, what kinds of things did you have trouble with?
So here's the thing. I never did homework ever. I if someone gave me a project that I felt was interesting, like they were like, "Oh, pick a book and then do a book report on it," and that, would give me the freedom to kind of dive into something, then I'm all about it. But if it was anything else, I literally just wouldn't do it. It would leave my brain the moment I left school, and I would mostly spend most of my time drawing, hanging out with my friends, or sleeping. I did not have the most positive home life, so sleeping was a good avoidance tactic. And
what about in the workplace after you graduated?
Oh God, just more avoidance. Yeah, I am not a good employee.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked one office job as a temp for a few months, and at the beginning it was like, oh, this is new and different, and I'm making good money, and I've got like this nice routine, and I was able to just like, at the time, because they brought all these temps on because they were in a crunch, it was like, I can show up an hour early and leave an hour 8. I get a bunch of overtime. I just put my headphones on, jam to music, and I just do data entry for 10 hours straight.
Right.
And for like the first month, that was actually a pretty cool, simple life. And then by the end of the second month, I was like going into the office and being like, can you please terminate my contract?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Once the novelty wore off, it was the most excruciating experience. And I've been in weird jobs ever since, because the office 9 to 5, I just could not hack it.
It's really difficult. And that has been my experience on almost every job. Everything from office work to retail is, I come in with a lot of enthusiasm. I come in with a lot of energy, and I'm learning about my coworkers. I'm learning the routines, and it's like fun and interesting. And I come in with all this like gusto to really make a difference and do well. But once that dopamine drops off, it becomes almost psychologically like torturous to do it. And that was really awful. I think that's a pretty classic experience. And the first thing that I thought when that would start to happen is like, well, I'm in the wrong field. I just don't like doing this job. And then I not quickly, it took agonizing amount of years, realized that, no, it's every job does that. Every job has its own dopamine drop-off point.
Even YouTubing.
And I think that there's a high percentage of people with ADHD in the YouTube space, just because we find it so difficult to fit into that 9 to 5 office mold.
And then, we sort of kludge our way into a bunch of fairly unhealthy habits for getting ourselves to work. And then as soon as something disrupts that, like the number of lefty YouTubers who have diagnosed themselves with ADHD as soon as the pandemic hit, because all our coping mechanisms fell apart. And like, I'm referring to myself with that,
Yeah.
They weren't good, but there were ways of working. And sometimes it's just not even like any specific thing changed. It's just the stress level was different.
Right. But it was a very precarious time, which added a lot of anxiety onto the ADHD brain, which is already like swimming in anxiety as it is.
So did you have any tools that you had like improvised to help yourself work? Or was it really just like, nope, it's as soon as the early dopamine wears off, it's just always going to fall apart?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the classic ones is caffeine, right? Just absolutely drowning in caffeine and Red Bull and, coffee, very early in the morning and then throughout the day. That was definitely a classic. And then I think music was also very helpful. I would try to do things like, here's a classic example for me. I would get to the downtown area before my my shift would start, and I would walk like about a mile and a half, just a ring around the area, like generally circle the area that I worked in these sort of like anxious walks. And on the way, I would get a coffee. So I was burning off all of this excess energy and anxiety energy, and then also giving myself caffeine. And that did definitely help me sit down and focus for a while. It didn't fully help, but it was definitely a coping mechanism.
Yeah. One of the tricks I got, which at the time was just like, it helps me hit my groove. And now I'm like, oh, no, it's a dopamine response. Was like, if I needed to work on a given day, if I got out of bed and immediately sat down at my desk, so that like the very first dopamine my brain gets of the day is doing work. Like I haven't eaten, I haven't gotten dressed, like I haven't like said hi to my partner or anything. It's just sit down, headphones on, start working. Then I could focus on the thing in front of me.
Yeah.
Because now my brain is latched onto that because it was the first point of interest. But first, you've got to have the wherewithal to drag yourself out of bed in the first place when it's like,
right.
But my phone is right here. You know, It's like there is easier dopamine right here. So it was very effective when I could get myself to do it, but it was highly variable whether I could get myself to do it. And then that comes with the whole, like, it's hacking a hyperfocus, you know?
Right.
Terminology. A hyperfocus or hyperfixation is when a dopamine-starved brain finds something interesting enough to finally release some happy chemicals and then latches onto it for dear life to the exclusion of everything else.
Exactly.
And the problem with that is then it's like 3 hours later and you're like, I still haven't eaten. I still haven't gotten dressed. I still haven't put on deodorant. Like, so it's a big old trade-off.
It really is. And I mean, the phone thing is such a difficulty because it's such a part. It's just integrated so much into people's lives now. The constant scroll, the ability to scroll on your phone as somebody with ADHD is such a doom. It just spells doom for your productivity for the rest of the day. I know that. I actively know that. And yet the first thing I do in the morning is I grab my phone. And it's stupid.
It's the devil.
It really is.
And it's like my brain is yelling, like, there is better dopamine. I'm like, yes, but there isn't easier dopamine.
Exactly. And it's that path to least resistance. Your brain is starved. It desperately wants it. And it's like, I'm going to get it the fastest and easiest way that I can. It's really bad.
I rely on hunger to finally drag myself out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah. Something that I found recently that I started doing, I think a couple years ago that I really like is I turned a section of my bedroom into a little cafe where I put my coffee pot in my bedroom with like maybe, some like muffins or something. And so when I wake up in the morning, I can actually wake up and have coffee immediately. And that is helpful.
I think there was a video, I think James Hoffman reviewed a coffee pot alarm clock.
Nice.
That like at a certain time in the morning, it just starts brewing. And then the sound of it brewing is part of what wakes you up.
Yes, no, it's perfect because you can also program a regular coffee pot. And then, say 7:30 in the morning, it just starts making your coffee and you start to smell it. And it's like, ooh, I'm going to get some coffee.
I went so long without the caffeine hack because like I came from a town where like straight edge was a thing in middle school, and like I'm not like anti-drug, but there's still sort of been this lingering like, yeah, but I'm kind of I don't like to have any habits or whatever.
Sure.
And so it's only in like once I realized I probably have ADHD, and until I can get any sort of treatment, caffeine is how people do it. And now I'm like, now I have my black tea in the morning. I have my Diet Dr. Pepper in the afternoon. And, that helps me get through. But for years, it was just like, well, I'm just raw dogging it through my ADHD.
Yeah. And there's so many consequences. I think that it's so unfortunate that people don't take ADHD seriously in the wider culture, because there are so many tremendous consequences to people's lives.
Yeah.
like job loss and, addiction and relationship problems. And especially if you're a late in life diagnosis.
Yeah. And it's so counterintuitive to people that a stimulant calms your brain down.
Right. Yeah.
So it's always like, no, that hyper kid, don't give him caffeine. And I'm like, no,
Exactly.
actually, give him speed.
Give exactly like this. I took my meds this morning and I had some coffee and I'm ready to take a nap. Feeling very calm.
Yeah, it's upsetting.
I know. Oh gosh, when we were in school, there was such a stigma against ADHD medications because it turns you into a zombie. And all these things of like, oh, it's like totally legal meth. It's like you're just doing meth. And I thought that it would like give me a heart attack or something. So I was so angry when I finally got medicated. And all I knew was just like intense peace and calm. And I was just like,
Yeah.
are you shitting me right now? God damn it.
Yeah. My first day on Concerta, I remember staring at my partner and being like, I'm having one thought at a time.
Yeah.
I didn't know that this wasn't what I was already experiencing until I
Yeah.
experienced it. Interestingly and coincidentally, this episode was recorded during a stimulant shortage and was partially edited during a week where I couldn't get my meds. Turns out, if you stop taking methylphenidate without tapering, you go into withdrawal. Like all my life, I'm like, yeah, this is what one thought at a time feels like. I mean, sure, Megan Thee Stallion is just playing in the background, and a different Megan Thee Stallion is playing also in the background at the same time.
And I feel it's like there's a resentment almost of like I went throughout so much of my life fumbling and flailing and drowning, and there's so many consequences just because I wasn't diagnosed as a kid.
Part 2. The gap between seeking help and getting help. So, when did you start to think, oh, this is maybe not just I'm kooky, but like when and how did you realize it might actually be ADHD?
I remember the exact moment. I was watching a YouTube video by the delightful channel How to ADHD. And she had I highly recommend that channel, by the way.
Link in the down there part.
She had a whole video about what ADHD looks like in women and how it really is often different, because my concept from when I was young about ADHD was usually a young boy who was like falling out of his chair. He was bouncing off the walls. He was being disruptive. And because he would have that hyperactivity part of it. And that just wasn't me. So I didn't even believe ADHD was real for a very long time. I thought it was just like kids watching too much TV or whatever, some such nonsense, and
there's a high correlation of ADHD and watching too much TV. My parents parked me in front of the TV for hours because it's the only thing that would get me to sit still.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, bright colors. Yeah. And so she started to list off what it is so much more likely to look like in women and girls. And I was like, oh God, that she just described my entire personality. And so, that was quite a shock.
Can you tell me some of the differences?
Well, it's much more likely to be inattentive. So instead of bouncing off the walls, a lot of girls tend to just zone out and be more like, you're more creative in that you are zoning out during class and you're drawing or you're writing a story, which was what I was always doing. And so that's like the main thing that teachers would look for. And gosh, it's been years since I saw that video, but I do highly recommend anybody, check it out because it was quite a shock.
I started dating a therapist who was like looking into, like she knows things about like highly sensitive personality and rejection sensitive dysphoria. And so she's like learning about this stuff and's like, I think I might be highly sensitive. And then she was like, does this stuff resonate with you? And I was like, oh, a little. Maybe I'm highly sensitive. Maybe I have a little rejection sensitivity. And then I'm looking it up, and all the websites that have articles about that are ADHD websites because they're like, this is highly comorbid with ADHD. And I was like, And then people start sending me TikToks of people describing their ADHD experience. And I was like, every single one of these is an it me moment.
Yeah.
And so that's when it started to be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely had a big awakening around, I think I was 34. Yeah, I was 34 when I realized. I was like, oh God. And then I think I wasn't diagnosed until I was 35.
Yeah. I was 37 when I first started thinking, and it was like 38 before I
Mm-hmm.
actually got on it, like on
Yeah.
any treatment, got diagnosed. So that's actually, you just answered my next question, was between thinking I think I have ADHD and actually getting help. How
Yeah.
long was that? It was about a year.
It was about a year, I would say, give or take, a few months. But um, I live in Oregon. And so we have really great healthcare here
Hmm.
that's run by the state. So it was a lot easier, I think, for me relative to people living in other parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Massachusetts. We also have pretty good state-run healthcare, but it's like the amount of time it takes to get a neuropsych eval is just, it's awful.
It did take me about 6 months from speaking to a GP, like a general practitioner, of like, I think I might have ADHD, to actually getting the one psychiatrist that they worked with to have an availability. That took like 6 months.
Yep.
He
Yep.
he was just booked solid constantly.
It was like 5 months before my first interview, and then another month till the actual test, and then like another month until the results, and then however long for my psychopharm wrangling with my insurance to actually get it approved. They're like, there's like, oh yeah, you have to talk to the prior auth department, but there's
Yeah,
7 of them.
right.
And every time she would talk to one, they'd be like, do all the work, get all the paperwork in order, and then be like, oh no, wait, we're the wrong one. Let's send you to this other one. And I think she spent 6 hours on the phone trying to get me on Concerta
Oh
before she
God.
finally. And all the things that they make you do to get diagnosed are the hardest things in the world for ADHD people to do.
Gosh, that's so the truth, because I've experienced so much of that. And one of the things I just do not understand is the way we prescribe medication to people with ADHD and then have them maintain that subscription or prescription is so like bad for people with ADHD, because you have to have there are no refills. You have to constantly renew your prescription, which means you usually have to speak to your doctor again, which means you have to have it on time. There's so much like room for error for someone who has difficulty with deadlines and remembering to do things.
Yeah.
And so you
Yeah.
end
I
up in a
mean,
situation where you're constantly out of your meds. It's ridiculous.
yeah, because it's a controlled substance. So they're
Right.
they're very anxious about giving out. And like, because there was this big scare back in the 90s that they were over prescribing it.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're like, okay, let's make it really, really difficult to get.
Right.
And we're all like, okay, but there are people who actually need it.
Right.
And did you have to do a neuropsych eval in Oregon?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So how?
it was, the situation was actually pretty amusing because it took me months to finally get him available. And then I had been waiting for this for so long. It was a big deal. I was terrified he was going to tell me that it was all in my head, or that I was, just faking or whatever, imposter syndrome thoughts. Um, and I was ready, and I had like notes about my experiences and everything. And the day came and I went to the wrong office. I
Oh,
went to the wrong
classic.
office. And so I called him like almost in tears. I called his office. I was like, I'm really sorry. I went to the wrong office because I didn't read the email correctly. I will be there in 10 minutes. I'm so sorry. And when I got there, he's like, I think that's pretty much symptom one, exhibit A
Yep.
right there. You definitely have a problem.
Yeah, I always say that like the first question on the neuropsych eval should be, how hard was it for you to schedule this neuropsych eval?
Right.
And if it's a write-in answer, obviously, and if you write a paragraph about all the tribulations you had, the rest of the eval is just, what type of ADHD do you have?
Yeah. Yeah, it was embarrassing, but it was also, I guess, helpful in the long run. It's like, well, okay, so we're definitely struggling here.
Is caffeine the thing you would say helped the most? Like once you realized you have ADHD, were you reading articles and finding techniques that could help you until you actually got treatment?
Yes, absolutely. I was able to hyperfixate pretty successfully on how how to help ADHD, which is great because I learned so many things about the brain and neurotransmitters, and then how to do things to help myself. Um, and it all helps a little bit. I think that's one of the frustrating things for people who have ADHD or people who are dealing with people with ADHD is that there's no one fix.
Yeah.
No one thing is going to ensure that you are just going to have a fun neurotypical day. You're not. You have things that are going can assist you, but it's never going to be 100%, and that can be really frustrating.
Yeah, like meds were the closest thing to a magic bullet where like
Mhm.
it made a big difference once I got on it, but it's also, it never works as well as that first couple of weeks,
No,
like
it's so
your
true.
brain acclimatizes to it. And, anytime you like run out and you go a couple days without, you realize like, oh, right, right, right. I'm still way better on than off.
Yeah,
But it's still like, you're chasing that dragon of like, oh, but remember how quiet my brain was that first week?
that first
Remember
time.
like
Yeah.
how much I got done? I like went straight to the hardware store and I didn't have to write a list of all the things I needed. And I
Hmm.
fixed my desk up all in one day instead of like leaving it broken for 2 months.
Yeah, I did a
It was
bunch of
amazing.
laundry. My house was tidy. My kitchen was
Wow.
organized. So
Laundry.
great. I
What a
know.
concept.
What a concept. There was no
Yeah.
doom pile. It was just brilliant.
Mm, mm.
Um, I think what's really helped me is just having the diagnosis has really helped me come to terms with the fact that my brain just doesn't work the same as
Yeah.
other people. And also, it doesn't work in a way that is convenient for the society that I live in. And that's always going to be a barrier. Um, Before I was diagnosed, there was a tremendous amount of guilt and shame around the fact that I just couldn't do things. Or I wasn't right, or I was just too lazy, I was too disorganized. And this was so much, for me at least, considered a character flaw of like, I'm just not applying myself. I'm not a serious person. I'm not a mature person. I was so hard on myself all the time about it. And finally, when I realized it's like, oh no, this is a neurological issue, this is a disorder, I was able to sort of let go of a lot of that shame and pain and like those judgments about myself.
You feel you were able to do some of that letting go even before you got treatment, like just while you were aware what it was and still seeking a diagnosis?
A bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
it's difficult because when it's so easy to that imposter syndrome. It's so easy to believe that you're just making excuses for yourself,
Hmm.
and it's just I don't know. Got that really. I've got a very judgmental brain when it comes to
Yeah.
myself. I'm very judgmental of myself. So moving past that has been really good for me.
Yeah. I found that once I was like, oh, I have ADHD, but I hadn't gotten treatment yet.
Hmm.
Um, I actually got harder on myself
Hmm.
because I was more aware of the things that were problems. Like I realized, oh, I'm forgetful. When was the last time I made it out of the house in one try without having to come back and be like, forgot my hat, forgot like my backpack, forgot to bring my book or whatever, right? Like I'm
Right.
going to the library and I left the books that I'm returning at home.
Hmm.
Um, and it used to just be like, oh, I goofy me, and realizing like, oh no, this is a pattern, and starting to pay attention to that and realizing that being aware of it doesn't make me able to stop it from happening.
Right.
um, that was really hard, and I realized like I am being so much harder on myself now, and I don't know. One of the things that meds did was because I started making fewer of those mistakes, I feel like my depression got better
Hmm.
because I was like, I didn't realize how much of my negative self talk was just criticizing myself for mistakes caused by ADHD. And
Hmm.
that once those, they didn't magically go away, but they lessened. I was like, I am like 90% easier on myself just by being 30% less forgetful.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Critical self-talk it's destructive for anyone, but it is especially bad for people with ADHD, I believe, because so many of the things like, like forgetting your library books, as you said, when you're going to return them to the library. I've done that exact thing before. And I think that the critical self-talk can be so damaging because it's going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
You will forget something again. You will make mistakes again. You are going to lose track of time. Those things are just going to happen. And if you're constantly if you're like constantly beating yourself up and the situation is not going to improve, it's just so destructive.
Yeah, and like before I registered that it was ADHD, it's like, yeah, it's going to happen again, but I'm going to forget that it happened this time by then. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to know it's a pattern. But now I'm noticing the pattern because I'm trying to catalog it so I can explain it to a doctor.
Right. Right.
It's just,
I
I don't know.
it's hard. And I think one of my most winning strategies that has really helped me cope over the years is just having a sense of humor about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you can, just trying to be a little more gentle with myself and just be like, oh yes, I forgot this, silly me.
Yeah.
Instead of that self-critical voice, and literally, I had to force myself to start doing that. To just be, I had to force a kind of silliness and irreverence to it, and it eventually became my new normal, which
Hmm.
was way easier to cope with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like probably 60-70% of the time now I can laugh at it. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's also like, ironically, there's the 30% of the time that my brain is like hard on me for not being nicer to myself. That it's
Yeah.
like, I'm like, yeah, you absolute fuck up. And then it'll be like, oh, and you can't even stop beating yourself up about it, even though you know it's a neurological disorder. You fuck
Right.
up.
How dare you not love yourself, you piece of shit.
I know it's
Yeah.
incredible the
Yeah.
lengths my brain goes to like stick to the narrative.
Right.
Part 3, post diagnosis. So, aside from like having a diagnosis, what kind of help are you getting now?
Mm, I mean, not much. It's once you have a diagnosis, I was able to get on medication, but I found that the medication, it's well, obviously it's not a magic bullet, and they tell you that going in. But while it's helpful, it can be very inconsistent. And I was really hoping it was just going to sort of fix me, and it didn't. So
Hmm.
I'm still trying to find a medication that works best for me. For example, Adderall literally just made me fall asleep. The first time I took it, even at the lowest dose, I just fell asleep on my couch for like 2 hours, which was not great for productivity. And
Great for
Ritalin
insomnia.
is great for insomnia. Yeah, I keep saying that Adderall is the best anti-anxiety medication I've ever been on. Like it's incredible. Ritalin is a little bit better, but again, it's just extremely inconsistent. One day I can get things done, and another I'm just asleep.
Yeah.
Um, and that really doesn't work when you need to have a job. You know,
Yeah.
I think that one of the most frustrating things about ADHD is how inconsistent it makes me. It breaks my heart because I would do anything to be a more consistent person. Almost any job that you're at, they want you to be almost robotically consistent of like coming in at the same time and doing the same quality of work every day. And that's just not possible a lot of the time for people with ADHD.
Yeah, you always sort of have to hope that like, well, I hope my hyper energetic up days balance out my low days so that
Right.
I'm averaging a decent employee.
Yeah.
but it's like a craps table at that point, you know?
It really is. It really is. And or you're hoping that you can just hide your lows from your
Mhm.
employer as best as possible. And it's very stressful.
So, meds were not a magic bullet. Do you have like life coaching? Do you have therapy? Are there like other techniques people have given you? I mean, I know my therapist, like my neuropsych, he came so close to not diagnosing me, I swear.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to say things like, oh, you need like more routine, or you need to treat your depression better, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any luck with things like that?
I mean, the routines are such a double-edged sword for people with ADHD because people are like, what you need is a routine. And I'm like, I literally know that you're right. I know that you're right. And yet a routine is deeply painful. It's deeply
Mm-hmm.
psychologically painful because it's not interesting and it doesn't give you that dopamine burst. So you can do it for a while and then you will get the same drop off that you get, you know, with everything. And so that is just, it's so deflating when people give you advice of like, just stick to a routine. And then you do it and it fails. And then you feel like you failed. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's funny because like uh people who understand it a bit better will be like, yeah, you know, it's okay. Like you use a routine for however long it works, and then you come up with a new one. But
Right.
when you're on like routine 27, you're like,
Mhm.
I don't know how many new routines I can come up with.
Right. At what
And
point at what point is 27 routines just not a routine anymore?
yeah, exactly. And it's like the part where routine fails and you have to come up with a new one is that part's very destabilizing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Hmm.
It
So
is.
you're still just kind
Yeah.
of like having to kludge your way through?
Yeah. I mean, I tried to get creative with it. Like, you know, I did the cafe part in my bedroom. That's really helpful. I work in an office, like in a home office right now, and I spent like 2 evenings decorating it so it would be an enjoyable place to be in, you know. Um, Little things like that to just make life easier and more pleasant is always best. But yeah,
Hmm.
I am just generally clawing through life still.
Hmm. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm amazed at the things you produce in spite of that.
It is done in spite for sure.
Yeah, I mean, always the Maria Bamford thing, which is like, if you stay alive for no other reason, please do it for spite. That has
Yeah,
gotten me through a lot of times.
yeah, absolutely.
So what are the kinds of things you wish you could be working on if your ADHD didn't get in your way?
Oh God, I wish I could write more. You know what? That's not even all of it. I wish I could have
You
a
did
normal
just
job.
write more.
I did, but I wish I could just be a more consistent person.
Hmm.
I wish I could just have a 9 to 5 job and just be like, well, this sucks, but oh well, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then come home and do creative things. I really would not mind that at all. It's just, but after 37 years, I'm beginning to realize it may not be possible for me. Yeah, there's a time when I feel like I've just had to mourn the loss of the person I wish I could be and the person I expected to be growing up. That was
Yeah,
hard.
the one of the hardest things I think with any neurodivergence that you have to engage with is it's like there's a normal version of yourself that you thought for a stretch of your life you were,
Yeah,
and you kind of have to mourn that person while also accepting that person was never real.
right.
And it's this weird twofold thing of like I did not this was more of a depression thing for me. Like with ADHD, I was so happy to finally have a label, but I struggled for a long time to admit I ever dealt with depression
Yeah.
because I was like, no, no, no. Because when I get through this rough patch, then I'll go back to normal.
Hmm.
And recognizing that, like, you were never what you think normal is, and you're never going to be,
Right.
is a really hard thing to let go of. And it leaves you, it prevents people from seeking help sometimes because admitting that is it's letting go of an entire self-conception.
Right. And it's deeply painful to admit that that struggle is never going to end. That it's always, and part of it is that society does not take ADHD seriously, and it's not going to accommodate us most likely in the near future at all. And so I've had to accept that, yeah, I'm always going to be a square peg trying to force my way into a circle, a round hole. And it's frustrating. But it is what it is.
What is something that has improved the most? Like, what do you feel you have kind of made strides with?
Oh, my confidence, for sure.
Yeah.
Just understanding who I am as a person, and that, yeah, these are the cards that I've got, and I'm just going to have to figure out a way to play them. I think that that's been made worlds better.
At this point, Mags's baby woke up and joined us, so you will from time to time hear him interject with, "What?" How raise two childs as single mom with ADHD?
Hard. Not great. Don't recommend, but oh, I don't know. You just kind of have to fall through it. It's a whirlwind. Gosh, I don't actually know. I'm not sure I have an answer to that question because I've never raised a child without ADHD. Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, it's kind of an asset because there's a tendency to be kind of childlike. And I feel like I can, yeah, there's always that joke that we're three kids in a trench coat. And so I feel like I can.
It's better than the 7 possums in a trench coat, I feel like.
I feel like I've got a lot of empathy for my children. Of just like, yeah, it's not fun being a kid because you don't have any control or autonomy over your life. And that sucks, So in that way, I think it's been okay. It's been hard, I think, financially the most.
Of course, yeah.
In my experience, having raised 2 kids with ADHD, the difficulty is not the kids. It's almost never the kids. It's the money. It's the other circumstances. It's society. It's rent. It's your bills. If you can cover those things, you can pretty much deal with anything your kid throws at you. If everything else is covered, at least that's been my experience, because financial struggles have been like the thing that have weighed heaviest on me as a single mom.
I mean, not to turn every conversation I have with everyone into a rant about capitalism, but I do think it's funny that we have built ourselves a society where, the one thing that is most important for the species to continue, we have made incredibly difficult.
I know. It's absolutely baffling to me. I keep hearing so much about like people aren't having kids anymore, and it's going to doom the human race because China's population and Japan's population and America's population, they're all going down because people aren't having kids. And the answer to this is just to simply force women to have children. And I was like, this is the wrong way to go about this, man. I don't know how you came to that conclusion. But maybe offer them more services.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. Incentives. What?
Because that's not, that may be logistically sound, but it's not ideologically consistent.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
Where are my manners for the fascists? God. It is so frustrating,
A compelling thing you said to me when we were first talking about this conversation was that you said raising 2 kids as a single mother with ADHD is in some ways easier than raising 2 kids with a cis man as a co-parent.
It's true. In my experience, yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, I'm going to piss off the males. Well, I can only go by my experience, but I have been married multiple times. I have multiple children, and I've had dozens of boyfriends as my time as a wicked harlot. But I have just found that men, once you move in with them, once they are integrated into your life, become part of the burden of life, right?
Mm.
They're not partners in my experience, you know. And that's not to say that men are bad or anything like that. I have a lot of men that I have great respect for. I just wouldn't marry them. I think that in I think that in relationships with women specifically, men tend to fall short. And what I was I was shocked to find was that being a single mom without a man in my life was infinitely easier. Um, that I had more time to focus on my kids. I had more time to focus on myself. My life is so much more peaceful without a man in it, and that's, you know, I feel like that sounds like I'm bashing men, but it's just like it's just the data. Like I just experienced. It was so funny. Oh my gosh, I found while I was, of course, looking, I lost my birth certificate because of who I am as a person. And I was looking for it, hopefully in some files. And I found an email I sent to one of my best friends in 2017, where I said, listen, I don't like being married. I don't like being in relationships with men. I don't like living with them. I am so much more peaceful and happy without that in my life. If you ever see me trying to get a boyfriend again, for the love of God, lock me in a closet so I can come to my senses. And I recently had to come to that same conclusion again in 2022 of like,
The
oh yeah,
ADHD brain learned the same lesson again and again.
again and again and again. And it's like there's that fear that's like, what if I forget again and I make my life miserable again? But I was like, wow. So I had actually figured this out, and then I forgot.
Oh, the pull of human drama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they say, you know, and by they, I mean a lot of women
Right.
have talked about how like raising kids with a man, it's like raising two kids with a man is raising three kids.
That is 100% true in my experience. And I don't know how to fix that. But I assume men need to
I mean,
do
it's not your
some.
job to fix it, you know?
You're right. Yeah. I guess it's not, but it really is. And it's frustrating because that has been every experience I've had dating a guy is, and like once he's in the relationship, once you've stopped like flirting, you've stopped courting and you are officially dating, he sort of like deflates into a child. And
Yeah.
then he becomes this like, it's part of, you have to like keep him, you know, you have to, he becomes upkeep, he becomes work. And that's really disappointing because I think that men can be great in so many other fields of life.
It's on my mind a lot these days because I am, you know, I am a man in multiple long-term committed relationships, having the kids conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is this question about like, in what ways am I fulfilling these stereotypes? Because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a lot of men don't do it on purpose. It's just kind of what they're used to. I mean,
Right.
like I knew a guy, you know, older gentleman who like he very devout feminist in like his speech and behavior, and then he got married, and the woman said like, I will never iron your shirts for you, and he was like, that's fine, you know, I'm single, I iron my own shirts. But then once they got married, he just kind of stopped ironing his shirts, and
Right.
eventually she got so sick of him having wrinkly shirts at work that she started ironing them. And I don't think that's like a decision he made. It's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of this unconscious thing of, if I stop doing this, it just kind of happens on its own.
Yeah.
Um,
I really don't think most men do it on purpose. I think it is sort of an unconscious habitual thing that's probably left over from their mothers caring for them when they're child.
mhm.
It seems like most men that I've lived with, they end up sort of devolving into a teenager once you're
Mm.
there, and you become like this mother figure, which is exhausting.
I am curious because one of the things that stresses me about this is it's hard for me to know, when am I just being a stereotypical dude and when am I just dealing with ADHD? because
Right.
the symptoms are highly like overlapping, you know?
They
It's
do.
like
Yeah.
I'd have these issues where my partner would be like, I'm going to the store today. I need rosemary. Do we have rosemary? And like I'll
Hmm.
go and look in the spice cabinet and then I'll text back like, no, we're out. And they'll be like, okay. And then they'll come home with a thing of rosemary, put it in the spice cabinet and find two things of it in there.
Hmm.
And on the one hand, it's like you can interpret that as what they call man eyes, right? Where like men look, but
Right.
they don't really look that hard because they don't actually care about the favor they're doing their partner.
Right.
But it's also like it's the ADHD. Like this is 40 little jars, each with their own graphic design. It is so much visual information that
Hmm.
I cannot like process right now. I swear I am trying to see the thing, but I am weirdly blind to what it looks like right now. Like
Well,
this is why Trader
yeah.
Joe's is a nightmare for me. It's like, oh, everything, every single thing here has its own graphic design. I feel like I can't navigate this space.
Well, so let me ask you, do you do a lot of cooking by yourself? Like, are you interested in cooking?
Yes.
Okay, well, that kills my argument. Because in
Yeah,
my
I cook,
experience,
but
yeah. Yeah, in my
it's
experience, that's usually because there's the man in the house is not, he doesn't feel like the kitchen is part of his space. That
mm,
is not his realm. And so he feels overwhelmed and like he's like, I don't know really what I'm looking at. And he hesitates and then he doesn't really see it because, he's just not in the kitchen very often.
well,
But
it's hard
for
with shared spaces, right? Because
Mhm.
like I don't know if this is your experience, but with mine and a lot of other ADHD folks I know is the like learning to navigate by habit that like
Right.
my wallet and my phone are always in the same pocket of my jacket. My keys are always in the same pocket of my pants.
Hmm.
And so it's a way of like not having to take in visual information because you're just like, oh, this thing is in this place. And I don't have to think about it. I don't have to perceive that visual information because my brain will get overwhelmed and shut down because
Hmm.
I just know where to reach for my wallet because it's either in this dish or it's already in my jacket pocket. And then
Well,
when
yeah.
something is not where I left it, right? Because
Hmm.
it's a shared space. Someone was going through the spice cabinet and they put things back and they're not exactly where they were before. And all of a sudden, I don't know what that thing looks like anymore. Like my
Right.
partner doesn't always put the bag, like the laundry bag that has like the Tide Pods and the quarters in it, doesn't always put it back where it was. And as soon as it's not where I expect it, I'm like, I don't remember what this bag looks like.
Right.
Like, it's a blue bag. No, it is not a blue bag. It's like a blue plastic bag. No, it's a black canvas bag. But I don't know what it looks like when it's not hanging on that doorknob it was the last 3 times I used it. Okay, there's something I don't think came across here. It's not actually a question of whether failing the women in your life is male entitlement or just ADHD. If you're a man with ADHD, both are going to be in play. And it sucks when you get that diagnosis and you have the assigned female at birth people in your life saying, oh, all those times you said you were struggling, you were actually struggling? I assumed you just a little bit unconsciously didn't care enough about women. Because especially if you got diagnosed late, I guess you don't care enough is something you've been hearing for decades. At the same time, neurotypical men disappoint women every day in the exact same ways as you, and that's not a coincidence. You were raised in the same patriarchy they were. This gets thorny because if someone uses internalized misogyny to dismiss your very real ADHD symptoms, that is ableism. But if you attribute to your ADHD what is actually carelessness towards women, that's misogyny. The reality in these situations is it's probably a mix, and you will never know the exact proportions because they don't make thermometers for that. And both problems are worth treating. So get good at being accountable while staying kind to yourself. It is possible to do both, he said, as if he is pulling it off. I'm getting better at it.
I'll tell you one of the things that really revolutionized my life was that when I had to move last year, I moved from like what was essentially a 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom apartment. and I had to get rid of like 70% of my stuff.
Whew.
That was an enormous, like it was hard, but it was also an enormous help because it scaled down the options of things that I have to look at and organize all the time. That was huge. And
Yeah.
also living alone was a big deal for me. Everything is my responsibility and everything is where I put it because no one else puts it anywhere because no one else lives here. You
Yeah.
know?
But I also can't deny that as a man, right? That like if I don't know where something is, someone will find it for me.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of a thing that people are socialized to do, is to sort of accommodate men for their failings, whether their failing is a lack of care or if it's an actual like neurological issue. Their failings get accommodated in ways that women's don't.
Yeah.
He agrees.
He agrees.
And that's the thing. It's like I know the overwhelming majority of like patriarchal habits, right? Like it's not some silver bullet like, oh, it's probably they just have ADHD and don't know it, right? Like
Yeah.
I know a lot of it is, it's not inattentive ADHD, it's just inattentiveness. It's just lack of consideration. It's not being socialized to think of other people's needs as being as valid as yours. But it's
Right.
also like, but if a man does have ADHD, the world is going to bend over backwards to accommodate him in a way that it's not going to accommodate non-men.
Yeah.
And it means
That's
that men go
yeah.
longer without getting diagnosed because they don't talk to people about their feelings.
Yeah. You usually have to hit a serious rock bottom before you will a lot of guys will actually admit that they're having some sort of issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't I wish I knew what the answer was with that. I just kind of found I sort of fell into a system that works well for me and that I just don't have romantic relationships with men.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is working for me. I don't know how everybody else is going to do it. I do see a lot of women struggling in relationships with men for those exact reasons. I hear the same complaints over and over and over, and I heard them in high school. I heard them from our mothers. I hear them now. And it's the same stuff and I'm like, I don't know. I just opted out.
Yeah, I mean,
No judgment, guys. I'm out.
I mean, even as a man, it's why I don't have a lot of male friends. Is I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't deal with men.
Yeah.
Like the way men are, the way that like, I don't know, the last like close male friend I have, I'm like, it's the only person in my life I have to tell over and over, could you please chew with your mouth closed? You know?
Right.
And I'm like, you're in your 30s, dude.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah,
it's probably a combination of like it's just a combination of a ton of different factors. I don't think it is one thing. It's like it's the way we raise boys, it's the way we accommodate men, it's the
it's
it's
the
our
way men
history.
police each other's masculinity.
Exact.
So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it would be queer to, talk to a therapist. I'm like, but you could be
Right.
happier. And as I say in one of my videos, happiness is for cucks.
Yeah. I know. It's more important to be angry and miserable and masculine, right?
Yeah. It's more
Yeah.
important to keep up appearances that there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah. It's a weird concept. I don't really get it, and I wish the best for guys, and I think that they could absolutely help each other. I just don't know what the answer is, so I'm like, well, I hope you figure it out. I will be over here not doing that.
You'll be over there hanging with your rad kids.
Yeah, you're pretty rad. I like them.
So, final question.
Okay,
How did you write this book?
how did I write this book?
Given
Well,
that you have ADHD and you say meds are not a silver bullet,
mhm.
because I can't write a book. I've tried. I mean, I might be able to, but I haven't figured it out yet. And you did. And I'm fascinated by this.
Well, to be fair, okay, so it is a debut novella. It is not long. It's part one of two. It is it was a hyperfixation for a really long time. And that's, I think, how I did most of it. Uh, but I found, so I started writing the book when I had a concept of the world and my place in it one way. And then I hit this huge, like, speed bump in my life where my entire reality changed. I became a single mother. I had to move. I was pregnant. It was a mess. And I realized that I just didn't relate to the characters the same way anymore. And so I took off like a year. I just stopped writing it for the longest time. And I got really depressed about it. I became very like sad. And I mentioned this in my first video for my new channel, that I realized that because I wasn't writing it and because I didn't know how to finish the story anymore, because I felt so differently about the characters. And because of that, I was like, well, if I can't finish my first book, then it won't be published. And if it won't be published, I will never be an author. And that made me so sad that I was angry. That sadness turned to spite so quickly, where I was like, how dare you say I'm not an author? Me, I'll show you. And so it's like this game of chicken now, where I cut it off at part 1. I left it on a cliffhanger, and I published it myself on the Amazon, on the Kindle Amazon like platform. And I was like, we'll see who's not an author. And now I have to finish it.
So you said there were some like tricks you used in writing it to make it more readable to people with ADHD?
Yeah. So one of them is that it's short. I think that there's a lot of sort of performative stuff around the length of a book. Like, I've read an 800-page book. That means I'm an intellectual. And I just don't, I don't think that fits. First of all, I don't think that accommodates people with ADHD. And I also don't think it fits with a lot of modern day, right? So like attention spans are so fractured at this point. And it's difficult for people to sit down and read that much when you've got so much going on and life is so chaotic. And so the pacing of the book, I tend to not, I don't know, and this is naturally just how I write, but I tend to have kind of fast-paced storytelling, which is why the book is short. It's just, and also that it's sort of spaced differently. There's more space between the lines, which I think is, I find personally helpful, because I get lost when I'm reading something that has a lot of really dense text. And the dense text also is very intimidating for me, where I'm like, oh my God, I can't even possibly read all of this. So spacing it out, I think, also really helps people with ADHD as well.
Spite was your overarching motivator,
right,
which I love. But the sitting down in front of a blank page part.
Mm-hmm.
Did you give yourself a deadline? Did you give yourself writing targets?
No, deadlines are not for me. I don't. No.
See, last minute panic is one of the only motivators for me. So I'm really curious about healthier ones. Okay,
so no, perhaps that's not correct, because I had almost finished part 1 and I was like lost and sad. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put it out for Christmas. So that is a deadline. I lied. So I put it out for Christmas, and that deadline helped me finish the last chapter, where I kind of, stopped things. But I've forgotten what your question was.
How, other than deadlines, how did you get yourself to sit down and actually write it?
I love the story. That's the thing. It's like, it's a hyperfixation. Like I love the story. I love the characters. I write almost like things for like TV shows, right? So when I write something, I write it as if I'm seeing it in my head, like it's like a movie. So each chapter is like a scene, basically. And so I would have these scenes play out in my head, and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Oh my God, I'm going to do it like that. And then I'd quickly make a note. I highly recommend getting something like Google Docs. I definitely recommend having something that syncs to your phone, so you can write on the go. You can write and not forget it, because even if I put something in my notes app, I'm just going to forget it's in my notes app. So,
and speed writing fast chapters, I imagine, is like where I get hung up, is I'm always like getting really fiddly with the prose and like trying to turn this note, this idea into an actual scene or a chapter or something, is always like, oh, wow, it's going to be so many more words. And it sounds like you're like, well, don't make it that many more words.
Right. Don't make it that many more words. Say, like, I think that people feel like in order for a book to be high quality, it has to be long. But one of my most favorite books in the entire world is like an essay by Albert Camus, Neither Victims Nor Executioners, which is 75-page long. That's, that's shorter than Strays. But he says so much in such a short amount of time. And I think that I really respect that. I think that's great.
Yeah, I used to make short videos. I miss those days.
Yeah, I still make short videos, but
I know I'm mad about it.
Sorry. I'm just very concise. I'm just like, this is what I gotta say. The end. I think part of it is also something that I forgot as I was saying it. Shit. Damn. Loading. Hang on. Loading. No, it's gone. I'm sorry.
This is how the magic happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Writing scripts. So I've been writing scripts for YouTube videos for like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So getting down and just like writing everything out and having a style of how I start it is actually pretty easy for me, where I will start and just write garbage. You have to write garbage first. I highly recommend writing garbage first. And I've done this. I co-wrote some screenplays with a friend of mine in Los Angeles as well. And it's like, you just get out garbage first, where it's like, and then this happens. And she's like, what the fuck? And then this happens. And oh my God, I can't believe that. And then you can go back in and actually make that coherent.
Yeah, I have a very hard time not just rewriting the thing I just wrote to make it better.
Right. Yeah.
It is hard to do the speed right for me, because you get interested in the thing in front of you and then you're like, no, I want to flesh this out. And it's like, no, just keep going. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah. And I still do that. One thing that I've found really helps me is if I highlight text, or I will change the color and be like, this part's garbage, fix it later. And then I move on.
That's a good
idea. Like, yeah. Or if it's like, I'm like, I think the date might be wrong here because I changed it earlier in the story. Come back to this later. And that way it pops out when you're scrolling up, like back through it. You're like, oh, that's right. When you find it later and you can fix it later. So you don't get out of the flow when you're writing.
Thank you so much for talking to me about this today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I'm very excited to read Strays, and I'm very excited for your new channel.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Magdalen Rose. I'm also on TikTok as Dollar Store David Lynch. And then my new channel is called Authored. Yeah.
That's a good title.
It's all about writing. It's about my quest to be a real writer.
Is it going to follow the writing of Strays Part 2?
Partially, yes.
Yeah. I can't wait. Point B is produced by me, Ian Danskin of Innuendo Studios. Mags, thank you so much for helping me kick this thing off. I'm already subscribed to Authored, and I can't wait to see the things you put out. I believe in you, and I appreciate your friendship. To everyone else listening, drink some water.